Welcome to the Marvel Cinematic University podcast. I'm your host, Anthony Canton III, and we are continuing our coverage of the Disney Plus animated series X-Men 97. Tolerance is Extinction Part 2. Guys, my goodness gracious. We just had another barn burner of an episode, but you know what also is a barn burner? The MC University Patreon, patreon.com/MC University Pod. We could get our bonus content, such as our subscriber mailbag, which we will be recording next week. Also, we are in the midst of the Mission Impossible series. We are on to Rogue Nation. So $3 if you want to get in on that and all of our back catalog of things along that nature. Also, if you're watching us right now, which you are on YouTube, please like, subscribe, all those things. Throw a comment in there if you feel free to. Also, I have a wonderful panel with us for this wonderful episode. Looking forward to talking about this show with them. First, the super producer, Jake Christie. Jake, how are you?
I'm doing well. Like every other week, we have plenty to discuss on this show.
Yes, most certainly. We most certainly do. Friend of the show is back for another. We haven't had him on in a while. It's good to see him again. Hunter Radesi, streamer fame, a nerdalist. Hunter, how are you doing?
I'm great. This is my first time seeing this new mustache look in a ring light, so I'm adjusting to that. But otherwise, killing it.
Nice. And we also have a new guest, a first timer, another nerdalist. Her name is Maggie Lovitt. Maggie, welcome to the program. How are you?
Good. Thank you both so much for having me. I'm so excited to talk about X-Men 97.
Yes, the pleasure is ours. And we will start here with both Hunter and Maggie from this perspective. As is anything when we do this show and we have a first time or new time guests, we ask them what is happening in their perspective of what they've seen from this show so far. So Maggie, I'll start with you. What have you thought about X-Men 97 to this point?
I have loved it so much. So I really come at shows like with like as a shipper. So there's been a lot of really great like shipping moments in the show for like every single ship that I have had since the original animated series was on, and a few that were like born from the comics that I never thought that I would have ever seen. So I have been absolutely having like the lion's share of fun with this show, and so that's really like where I've come from with it. But also I think it really helped to like reignite my love for Marvel that is kind of disconnected in a lot of ways with, you know, MCU. So that's been like a huge thing for me. Like it's getting me like reading comics again and like really excited about the X-Men and even kind of really excited about where things are going with the MCU as a whole as well. So that's been like a big thing for me with the show so far.
Oh, awesome stuff. And Hunter, what have you thought so far of the first 8 episodes of X-Men 97?
Oh man, I mean, I'm gonna honestly echo a lot of what Maggie just said, and that like I've been really excited about what this has been doing, like for my enjoyment of Marvel and the MCU, and like just kind of the X-Men in general. I don't think I realized how much I was missing the X-Men in my life, and how much I was missing just some like really good quality mutant content until the show started coming out. Because I mean, when I was younger, I mean, who didn't love the X-Men, right? Like they've always been one of Marvel's like big things. And I have such a great memory of when I was little, like my dad letting me, like we sat down and we watched like all of the Fox movies that had been out up to that point. And like, it was such a great night. And I was obsessed with the X-Men and Wolverine and like all these characters. And then like the MCU happened and they kind of like fell from the forefront of things. And it's just so cool to like see them in the spotlight and see like everybody kind of communally coming around them and just enjoying it so much. And just week in and week out, it just banger after banger in terms of episodes. Like I've yet to like wake up, watch an episode on Wednesday morning and be disappointed. And so it's just so cool to have a show like that in my life again.
It is stunning that this show continues to elevate the bar for itself. And honestly, as we discussed last week, in terms of what we might want to expect from a live action version of the X-Men in the MCU. Because right at this point, it does feel like this is some of the best content that we've seen, best show that we've seen in terms of Marvel animation. It's really incredible. But let's just jump right into the episode and a lot of the different things that we can go off from that. I'll start it this way. Jake, in terms of what you saw from this episode, what do you think was the most meaningful part of the story to you?
I think it was the conversation between Charles and Magneto that had a lot of people, present company included, saying Magneto is right. Not me, but some people here saying that. Because I think this is the crux of the whole thing. It's how do you deal with this problem? And obviously, there are problems to both sides. I think that some people undervalue the problems that Magneto causes because he is, killing a lot of people, and killing people is bad generally. But obviously, we see that Charles is ineffectual, and you kind of understand why people don't want to go with him, because it's like it makes sense. It makes sense that people will hear both of these messages and be like, okay, do I want the guy who's been wrong over and over again, who abandoned us? Do I want to believe in him, or do I want to see the guy who's showing strength, who has a plan, and say, yes, that guy is right. Even though, as I pointed out last week, every person in the world who was on a ventilator is now dead. Any other life-saving equipment, all of them are dead. So there's that.
Yes. And I think the thing for me that really kind of stands out in everything that you mentioned, Jake, more so than anything else, is the idea that Magneto not only had to watch all these people die, including Lurch, who he was trying to protect at that moment, but just also the idea that he tried to do it Charles's way and it went so horrifically wrong. And I think that is so difficult. You spend so much time fighting your friend, trying to let them know, hey, this isn't the way to go about this, and we must do it away. Yes, there are some hard decisions in terms of who must live and who must die. That's a greater conversation to be had. But at the same time, that aspect of Charles going back to the president and saying we need to work on this and work on that and trying to talk to his students, it's really difficult to take at this point. Maggie, what was your perspective on how this played out? Because this is really the central theme of what the X-Men is, Magneto and Xavier, and how this goes back and forth. And while Magneto's methods are a little rough, as we see at the end of the episode, there is a method to the madness. I want to get your thoughts on that.
So I am a huge Magneto fan. That man has never done anything wrong in his entire life. I will aid and abet him on every single one of his war crimes. And I do think it's really interesting because essentially the narrative is trying to tell us that he is a bad guy. He's a villain. They have Wolverine both in last episode and this week's episode saying that he started war, but he hasn't started the war. Bastion and then humanity has started the war. This is just him retaliating and like protecting mutant kind. And it's so interesting that the narrative is like in some ways at odds with like the moral correctiveness of what Magneto is doing. Like if you put yourself in the mutant shoes, he is acting completely within his rights and then like retaliation in that way. And so I think that's been really interesting to see like how the narrative is like really forcing that point to some extent. But I thought this was such a long overdue moment. I had just rewatched all of the animated series and I actually just had reposted it on Twitter as well. The scene where like Charles uses the Holocaust and the memories of the Holocaust to like hurt
Insane stuff.
Magneto. And I'm like, this dude has like been long overdue for being told to shut up, because Xavier is like so far up like his own like belief in himself and his like moral like rightedness with all of this. And it's so interesting to see how the show is playing with that. Especially last week there was the reference that like Bastion thrived because of what Charles's entire ethos is for tolerance, essentially. Right. So I love what they're doing. I love what they're doing with this moment so much. It was a like fist in the air, so excited that like this is what he's saying. Like I was so excited with Magneto's monologue here.
Oh yeah, for sure. And Hunter, as someone I'm sure we've had a couple of offline discussions about the way that the show has gone, but like in terms of what you're seeing with Magneto and Xavier, where do you stand on Magneto is right?
I mean, I think anyone who's watched every episode of this show, I did the same thing as Maggie too. I rewatched like the whole original series right before 97 started, and like I kind of feel like you'd be a fool not to agree with them at this point. Like I don't know, the show's done such a good job of structuring itself in a way that like doesn't just, it's not just him saying I'm right, it's not just people saying Magneto is right, like it's really showing you why he's right. Like it's not just verbal, it's not just throwing things at you, it's like a demonstration of what the X-Men are about and the things that they're fearing. And honestly, if like to put it bluntly, I just rewatched the episode again right before we did this, and it's even more apparent on the second time. But like, Charles is just kind of annoying at this point.
He's so annoying.
He's so annoying, and sometimes he's just giving these speeches, and I'm like, dude. I'm saying on my end, I'm like, shut up. Like, I don't know. He's talking to Scott and Gene about their whole thing. He's giving everyone all these speeches, and like nothing is working. And then the show kind of has to make Magneto do like something even just a little like over the top just to justify him like being a villain, you know, that classic story writing technique. But I don't know. I just feel like Xavier's whole presence in this episode especially can kind of just be summed up by like he at some point he just gets hit and that he makes that noise, and I was like, that's it. That's the whole thing for him.
I have to say, to what you were saying there, like my question also with the way that Xavier was working this episode was like, has anybody stopped and even talked to Rogue? Like, she was in a coma last week. This week she's awake. This, like, she's walking around in Gambit's jacket looking like she hates everybody and what they're saying. And I'm like, has anybody stopped to check in on her? Like, she also witnessed horrible things on Genosha. Like,
and the thing is, I know that I'm a corny person who is generally like likes to push back against when people say that villains are right, you know, and also
okay, that's my entire brand.
Yeah, it's. I think it's just that I understand that these are obviously stories or whatever, but I think it is important at the same time to weigh the actual human cost such as it exists in fiction. And, yeah,
I love Maggie's shrug is incredible.
I'm looking around my room and I'm like, there's Darth Maul, Darth Vader, Kylo Ren, Tyler.
Yeah, and obviously I think that I'm perfectly fine rooting for villains in some ways, and I think that it's an important part of storytelling to understand villains. I think that I mostly like this because I see it's such a popular take on the internet to whenever there's a villain who has any sort of mildly, generally correct idea, to be like, yup, I'm all in on that. And I just want to be like, guys, it is bad to kill people. That's always bad, and we should try not to do it generally. That's my role.
Yeah.
And, like, Magneto is not just killing people, he is threatening to literally end the world as we know it. So there's...
Let it burn.
I mean, if you want to, I mean...
We're just gonna annoy Jake, like, this whole episode.
Yeah, I mean...
So bad. I'm like,
yeah.
know that you were bringing on a villain lover.
I see your Twitter. I know.
You saw.
I'm a decent producer. I scoped it out. I knew what I was getting when I invited you on. But I don't know. I just like to push back.
Yeah.
Because I honestly don't know what it is in me. I think I'm just a softie who is like, but the innocent people. Which now that I say it like that, it makes me feel like I'm mocking you guys more. But I do respect the opinion that you guys are coming with. But yeah, I think that the way that this shows it, it's not kind of like it's not cop-out-y so far, which I think is great. Because even if I can't fully get on board with Magneto's agenda, I can see his agenda is much more appealing to me than Charles's, and I'm a softie.
Yeah.
Exactly. And especially when listening to Xavier still gets the same amount of people killed.
Yes. Yeah.
Jake makes me feel like I need to go on the record and say, like, I also don't approve of murder, but... but...
I will go on the record. Fictional murder. That is fine.
Yeah. And in the nature of the show, like, obviously, like we were saying earlier, the whole thesis is, like, they're trying to show the extremism on both sides, like, understood. But yeah, murder is bad, but fictional murder can be interesting sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing that's so interesting about villains and why villains are so compelling is that in order to have a good villain, you have to have very convincing motives. And a lot of the times good guys don't really have strong motives because their main motive is being good. So it's a very flat, very linear personality trait and arc and like all of that. Whereas villains, especially with Magneto and X-Men 97, we've had this really beautiful arc with him being like, I don't agree with this, but because my friend asked me to follow this path, I will follow this path to the best of my ability. And then when I am proven right, the gloves are coming off and it's back to like how I felt before. And that's such an interesting arc for a character to go on. Whereas like as you were saying, Jake, like Xavier is really annoying because his only real personality trait is like, I am morally right and we must be morally pure and do good things. And it's like, dude, we don't want to talk.
Like we ain't see you up there with the Shi'ar chilling, running an empire, going off for your own little romance, and then it's like I got to come back and be the savior.
He's either like, I am
he
right.
faked his death. He got them into so much like bad publicity and like trauma and all of this because he faked his death to go get married in space to a bird girl.
He's either like 100% I'm right, moral high ground, or he's just kind of like head hanging like, I was wrong. Like over like those were like his two modes right now.
And also, we can't discount it's the thing Maggie's tweeted about, the fact that Magneto is just so hot. It really it helps a lot. And
He's so hot.
That hair is working, man. Listen.
Yeah.
Like he's like 60 and he is freaking cut.
Yeah.
They put him in tidy whities for like 2 episodes. They knew what they were doing.
Oh, they knew exactly what they were doing. They did that for me.
Yeah, and the thing with Xavier that I think is just so frustrating is then he talks to Cyclops and Jean in the early portion of the episode and says like, "Hey man, I did this for y'all to get out of here." And it's like,
and just for them, like nobody else is like. Did you not think about
Nobody
it?
else
But also,
matters.
like, you raised them their whole lives for like this one thing, and at no point in that time do you ever communicate to them. But also, I hope for this for you, and then you just like dip, and then like give the whole thing to someone else and being like, I'm sure they'll figure out why I did this. It's like
With
no.
explanation. Like Xavier, you left it in your will and testament for Magneto, but did you tell the X-Men?
didn't even
like,
let them know,
No.
not a thing. And
He's got a
just
flair
sat
for
back
dramatic.
and enjoyed.
Yeah.
And then this man shows back up like everything is peaches and cream. Like, come on, man. It's just really it's really difficult for me to accept Xavier, which makes the the events of this episode and what we may look forward to for the finale next week very compelling, because how do you bring it back to a point where we can look at Charles and be like, okay, I guess.
I'm so scared about next week because they speed ran through so many major comic book arcs this week and last week. I'm like, where are we going next week? Are we getting Age of Apocalypse? Are we getting Onslaught? Are we getting both of them at once? Like, what's happening?
It would be the most X-Men the animated series move ever to have this whole season be like this, and then in the last 5 minutes be like, it was Apocalypse the whole time. Because that was like...
So I have a theory.
Oh, throw it out.
Okay, so the fact that this entire season they keep treating Bishop as a MacGuffin, like I fully expect him to come back and do like a full timeline reset, and then we have to go through all of this again in season 2 with differences. Like that is where I think it could go right now.
Well, that's interesting because remember this the Genosha thing is a fixed point.
Yeah.
So that can't be changed.
But everything after Genosha.
Everything after that can. So where
Sinister.
do you right, Sinister, where do you go from there? That's actually really fascinating. I'm curious to see where that goes exactly.
Yeah, and for me, even without having a background in the comics, because Maggie, the whole thing with this show is that I didn't grow up with this stuff, but just like knowing how TV works. Like I was thinking about how like in the season 3 finale of the new Doctor Who, there's the whole bit where like the whole world basically goes to shit, and you kind of know that it's gonna get reversed because there's just no way to keep telling stories from this space. And so like once about like I would say like an episode and a half ago when it was clear that both a ton of X-Men were dead and like the world was never gonna be amenable to future storytelling, it was like, okay, clearly they need to do something to unwind all of this. And for me, it's not even like, sometimes that would kind of feel annoying, but because they already set up Bishop, I think that it's not out of nowhere. And the thing I always say about time travel stories like this is that if it still happened in the characters' minds, it still happened. So it still has the emotional impact that you would have.
I'm not entirely unconvinced still that they just don't speedrun Onslaught next week and like use that as a...
I'm very convinced that Onslaught is happening.
Yeah,
I saw something today from people who think it's not, and I'm like, guys.
Well, it does feel obvious that that's the direction that they will go. And
especially after like pulling from Fatal Attractions and like so many things this week, I'm just like, okay, I see what's happening. I see the writing on the wall.
Yeah, no, for sure. There's a lot of stuff from this episode that's very noteworthy. I think I will start in terms of just the fighting. The fighting again really kind of is elevated every week. It's always fun to watch and see the scenes. The stuff that we see with Storm and Jean and their relationship, first of all, is very nice. The way that Jean's so excited to see her again, Storm's new look, all of those things, and Forge is back. So like you got a bit of the whole gang back together, and they split up the teams, and Morph turning into the Hulk. That was fun.
That was so fun.
That was great. Yes. I also like that they continue to like commit to the idea that like the Marvel animated universe was a thing and they use all the same designs. Like I noticed that the Hulk looks just like the Hulk did in like the Hulk, the animated series. And that was like a nice little thing. I like that. It made me smile a bit.
Yes. Yeah. Nice little nod there. And well, I think it's funny because when you look at Mr. Sinister in particular, I feel like, did we ever see Mr. Sinister fight like that before? That was cool to kind of see. We haven't really seen that in the animated series so far.
I don't think that we've seen him fight Jean either like that. Like, I don't think Jean really has had a chance to go like one-on-one with him, even though she definitely deserves to.
I love when she was throwing the bowling balls at him. Because even though there were probably other heavy objects, it was just comical to see bowling balls thrown.
No, there was also that great little like strike sound effect too. When he like I was like, that's perfect.
I think the wild part about that is there's literally a video from earlier this week on Twitter of somebody throwing a bowling ball at somebody's head. I was just like,
did they hit the wrong person?
Yeah, they hit the wrong person, but that was the first thing I thought of when I saw Jean with the bowling ball. So I was like, oh my god.
I will also say I really enjoy thinking about Mr. Sinister in a like. The only thing he did to prep for that fight was coming up with the like Jean joke.
That was a great joke.
Like he was just in a corner and Bastion was like, "What are you doing over there?" And he's like, "Nothing." He's like,
"I'm working on my type 5. I'm working on my type 5."
Jean. He's just like, how am I going to deliver this?
Oh man, that's great stuff, man. Great stuff. And we get Cable using telekinesis, and I was like, oh. Okay, we're really getting into it. Hunter, I'm sure, like, obviously big comic book guy. How'd you feel seeing Cable use his powers against Jean in that manner?
It was super rad, to put it simply. I like. It's one of those things you almost forget he can do it because no one like they never adapt that from him, and like it's not something that's super talked about. And I think his whole like big guy with muscles and bigger guns who time travels is sort of his whole shtick. So it was really fun for them to pull out the whole. Oh yeah, he's still a mutant though, with some pretty cool mutant powers. And the dialogue right before he pulls it out is fantastic because it's such a good setup of the stuff tends not to skip a generation, and then he just immediately goes full anime. You're like, whoa, oh gosh, yeah. That's fantastic. Yeah, so it was really really cool. I was smiling from ear to ear on the edge of my seat. It was such a cool moment.
And Maggie, was there anything that specifically stood out to you in terms of the action that you wanted to note or point out?
I don't think the action exactly. The biggest scene that I like really stood out for me in this episode was Rogue choosing Magneto's side, and I love the scene because they both fly, and so I love both of them rising above the docks and the lightning and the scenic styling of everything because it's red and green in the sky, so it matches their outfits. And I also like the fact that like this is the same uniform that we saw her in the flashbacks with Magneto, so that was a nice callback. And I loved everything about that. I also loved Roberto choosing his side as well, kind of fulfilling the Colossus role, especially since we have this like now new backstory with how he's feeling about his mom that we didn't really get last week, but we got the little bit of, exposition of him talking about how he feels about his mom, basically like letting him be dragged off by these people. So I thought that was a really powerful, really great moment. And again, I also love that everybody was so surprised by it on the X-Men. And I'm like, well, if you had talked to Rogue, you would probably know how she's feeling right now, and it would not be that big of a surprise. Yeah. I also like that she took off Gambit's jacket and left it with Xavier, because I obviously feel like he would have chosen the X-Men over Magneto, not just because of the whole love triangle thing, but just very different set of morals there. So I really love that moment. And I also love the action scene of her being once again restricted by metal and watching something horrible happening to Magneto. Like, love that happened twice.
Let me tell you about Rogue, man.
I love that girl.
One piece of ass was gone, so she had to go back to the other one. You know what I'm saying? I'm just saying. She was going where she needed to go. That's all I know, man. I get it. I understand it. I respect it to a degree. I respect it.
The thing is, like, even not talking to Rogue, like, why are they really that surprised? Because like 2 episodes ago, she fully was like, "I'm just murdering Trask. Like I'm just doing this like in front of everyone." Yeah, and they're like, "You're siding with Magneto?" Yeah, of course.
Hey guys, did you see the broadcast from Genosha when I was like making out with him like 3 weeks ago? Like,
and I feel like people are constantly not reading the room.
Yeah, they're constantly.
And it's because I think it's notable that Roberto joins up with Magneto. Because much like Rogue, he's not insulated with the X-Men. Like, he experiences the world, and I think that unlike someone like Scott, it's like Roberto's like, no, I know how they talk about us. Like, I don't trust them because I don't live my life in a mansion full of other mutants, you know?
Well, that's the thing that I think a lot of people like overlook with the X-Men dynamics, specifically here in this series and the animated series. Like, Rogue came into the X-Men later in life. Like, she was already an adult when she joined them, whereas like Jean and Scott were essentially like Xavier's kids, that he essentially raised them. And so there's a very different dynamic there, that Xavier's always thinking about Jean and Scott, and he doesn't really care about any of the others. Like he has a passing interest for Wolverine, but they all have to look out for each other. And I think that's where a lot of their dynamics, and I think specifically for Rogue, because Rogue is one of my like all-time favorite characters, but I think she's been really unmoored. Like, she had both Eric and Remy who both cared about her and like had her best interests in heart, and then she lost both of them, and nobody else really cares about her. So like, she was like very much on her own there, because they just kind of have their own things. Like, Logan is really concerned with what's going on with Jean, cares very deeply for Morph as well. There was that great arc in the animated series with everything that happened with Morph there. Yeah. And then like obviously Jean and Scott, and then the rest of them are on their own to hope. Obviously there is, oh my God, why am I blanking on his name? Nightcrawler. Who cares about what's happening with Rogue too, but still, like, because I mean,
it's never to that degree. Even though they did have a conversation previously where he did try to comfort her. But go ahead, Hunter.
Well, I was gonna say 2 things really quick. One is everything Maggie just said 100% correct, and also I'm really glad that Rogue straight up said that to Xavier in this episode. That was really cool. And 2, as much as I love Rogue, I feel like the one flub she had in the episode was, she looks at all the X-Men. She's like, well, none of you were there in Genosha. Like, it was just me and Eric and stuff. And I was like, yo, my boy Nightcrawler is right there. He is right there.
Your brother was there, Rogue. I know you're only thinking about Magneto right now, but...
Yeah, he's there clutching his pearls. I'm like, okay.
Whoa. He's clutching his rosaries. It's his rosaries.
I know.
Anytime I see Nightcrawler now, because AC, you weren't here for this episode, but when Rod said that he wishes that Nightcrawler was a Baptist preacher instead of a Catholic priest, I think about it every time.
I like to believe that he's a little bit of everything. He likes all the different religions.
But Rod was doing an impression of him doing a sermon as a Baptist. It was just a great stuff. Go back and it was episode 6.
Oh God, that's great.
Yes, and I think the Rogue aspect of that is, I mean, to your point, Maggie was a really important part of the episode, and honestly the season, in terms of all of the credibility that Charles has lost, and all of the credibility that Magneto has, and how dangerous that credibility is, because you put that power of belief into somebody with that much power, and Lord only knows what could potentially happen with that. So, while like it's cool to go like Magneto is right and all that other stuff, and the theology of it, sure, you could say that he is, but what does he do with that power in terms of shutting off the Earth's power, and what he does to the X-Men towards the end of this episode? Like, all of those things, there are consequences that will come from that, and we just don't know what level what degree this will change things forever. And this is where your time travel theory comes into play with Bishop, and would love to see where that happens. I feel like this conversation has been a precursor to the comic book panel that we kind of figured that we would see, and the fact that we got that at the end with Magneto ripping out the adamantium from Wolverine's body was hellishly gnarly, man. That was goodness gracious. That was a lot. Especially after Logan got a good stab in on him, and man was bleeding pretty profusely, but he was like, nope. Nope, I'm not done, but you are, buddy. You're done. Hunter, I will start with you on this. What did you think of seeing that after, especially as someone I'm sure as you've read, seeing that on screen had to be something special.
Yeah, it didn't occur to me that would happen in like an animated, like in this show, or I don't know, like if you had asked me if that was going to happen in the show before the season started, I would have been like, there's no way. That's an insane thing for them to just throw in, like,
especially as graphic as it was.
Exactly. It's just throw in season 1 of X-Men 97. But then the show keeps proving every week that it's really unafraid to just tell the story it wants to tell, which I think is super cool. And yeah, and not only was it graphic, it was almost a 1-for-1 of the actual comic panel, which I thought was really, really neat. I mean, if anyone hasn't seen it, I would suggest like Google the comic panel, because they pretty much animate.
Yeah, I looked it up afterwards, and it's exactly the same thing.
It's exactly the same thing. It's super, super cool. So I guess I wasn't expecting to see it, and then like Maggie said, I was starting to have inklings that it might happen, or AC said. And I was like, I don't know, but are they going to do it? And if they do it, is it going to be as graphic as it is in the comics? Because that's a pretty crazy thing. And then they just went all out. And then it was it was the last shot of the episode. And I'm like, I don't even know. How do you even open next week?
Man, cutting the episode off like that was insane, man.
Especially when they know, like, we know the way that they jump around. Like, we're going to be in the middle of the next crisis and be like, what happened afterwards? What happened after? You can't just leave us there. Oh.
Yeah, and then sideline. I mean, honestly, like, I'm guessing that Wolverine is going to be sidelined for this last episode, which is
you're guessing.
It's just I mean, obviously, but
listed as doubtful, no fucking bones.
That is
Wolverine out for season. Yeah, I also will say it was like, he's kind of been sidelined like this whole show. I don't mean sidelined that he wasn't there, but you know, people have brought it up plenty of times that
to its credit, I will have to say.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And Wolverine has not been nearly as quippy or funny as he was in the animated series. Like, rewatching that right after the first 3 episodes dropped of this one, I was like, where is my snarky Canadian? Where has he gone? Where is he cutting up his baloney?
He's even more world weary than usual.
I know.
Yeah.
Bring him back from war.
Yeah, so I think it was cool because, like, I mean, he had his claw tornado last week, but aside from that, it felt like him stabbing Magneto was this cool, like, he hasn't been in the spotlight all season, and now he's here for this big, like, Arya Stark moment, and he's like stabbed the Night King, like that kind of vibe. You're like, oh my gosh, we didn't expect it to be him in this moment.
And he gets that great line off too.
Yeah, he does. Yes, yeah. And then that's thrown literally right back in his face. It's like, yeah, I guess so. Yeah, so it was cool that they kind of inverted that moment immediately and just had it turn right back on him, and then they brought this really iconic comic book moment to life in such a cool way. And the show is really just all gas, no breaks from the first episode. So I just feel like every week it's like speed running through these crazy moments and stories, and it's the perfect example of how to do that well. Because not every show can do this, not every show should do this, but X-Men 97 is pulling it off.
Which is kind of, I've said it a lot already, but it is kind of insane how well that they're doing this. Because I don't see shows really gas through storylines like this, and it's coherent, it makes sense, and you're kind of like, you're locked in and you're ready to go for each week. And it doesn't feel like they've skipped over anything. It feels like every character has gotten the proper amount of care and time for the most part, and I think it's just it's such a credit to what they've put together to this point.
Mhm.
So Maggie,
Yeah.
so we get the moment with Charles and Magneto before this happens. Is obviously the shut up moment is great as he literally shuts him up is fantastic. What did you think of that entire scene? Everything had played out to the end, and your feelings on it. Seeing your guy do the thing.
I like Hunter. I'm a big comic book fan, so it was really fun to see that exact moment, like torn straight from the pages and play out on the screen. And I realized it was getting ready to happen the moment that Wolverine stabbed Magneto. I was like, oh. You're done for.
Yeah, you're cooked, buddy.
And I definitely did not expect it to be as graphic as it was. It still wasn't necessarily as graphic as that specific panel,
Right.
but it definitely hit the same notes. It was why I'm wearing the Wolverine shirt today for this episode. I love Wolverine, and I also love Magneto. And I think in that moment, my love for Magneto definitely overwhelmed my love for Wolverine, because I was like, yeah, take him out.
You were Zendaya watching the last match in Challengers.
Yes. Yes. Exactly. So it was really great. I think the biggest takeaway that I have from that entire moment is, again, as somebody who loves Rogue so much, I was just like, she's once again watching Magneto die. Can't handle this, and again, she can't do anything to stop it because she is being held back by metal. So that was where a lot of my thoughts and my feelings were. But I was also like, there was so much going on, because in tandem with this, we have Scott realizing that Jean is dying.
Yeah.
And there's just, I don't know how many death scenes I can handle this season. I feel like every 2 episodes we're dealing with like just so many people we love and care about being slaughtered.
Yeah.
So
Scott blast the professor. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot.
That felt very modern era X-Men.
It is. And that's one of the things I've always loved about the X-Men as well. And one of the reasons why, like, I was not super pressed about all the deaths on Genosha, especially with like Gambit and Magneto. And I knew Magneto was not down for the count for long. But the X-Men never die. Like, there's always a loophole to get them back. It's not as cut and dry as some of the other comic book runs for the non-mutants. It seems like they always have a way to come back. So that was why I ended this episode with the feeling that we were going to get a soft reset on some of the events, because we really have lost like most of the team, and going into season 2 and like bring everybody back.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
So yeah, that was where I was.
Yeah, it's. I mean, going into this finale, like we theorized briefly earlier, but it's not like I'm thinking about it and surmising what could come ahead and what are these moments that we look forward to in terms of that, because you had Storm shot out of the sky by the Sentinels, and Forge going down in the plane. You got Jean in her situation, as you said, with Cable. And Bastion is still there. So Bastion still, that issue with the Sentinels is still present. So we're headed to, at the minimum, a Magneto Bastion confrontation. So that's coming.
Overdue.
Yeah, that's way overdue. So where does this go? I mean, you know what, Jake? I'll ask you. What is the most important thing that you want to see next week to close out the season?
I'm hoping to see some type of more understanding, maybe not from Professor X, but from other people in his cohort. Like, I don't expect anyone to fully go Magneto is right, but I think that especially people who are, like I said, not Professor X himself, because he's just stubborn and like a true believer, but I think that there needs to be some recognition among, like, you know, the Scotts and the Wolverines and the Jeans of the world that, like, Professor X's plans haven't worked. Like, he's kind of failed them, and he's stuck to his guns on this really, you know, not silly, like, a noble, but that, like, just expecting everyone to be nice is not enough. And so I think that there will be some type of come to Jesus or, you know, Eric moment, as it were. And so I'm looking forward to that, because I think that there needs to be like a ideological resolution to what's going on, because so much of the show has been ideological as opposed to
I think Scott is in a prime potential to be one of those that defect. I actually fully had expected this week that he was going to, because he was already so ticked off about so many things in like the last 2 episodes. So with Gene down for the count, at least for the time being, I could definitely see him being like, screw this.
Well, even going back further, the
Yeah.
interview that he had on television.
Yeah, I mean, that was the moment where I was like, oh, I thought he was going to turn. And so I'm still waiting for that moment to happen because I think it's also long overdue.
Yeah, for sure. And Hunter, how about you? What is one thing that you'd like to see accomplished in this season finale?
I mean, to be honest, I don't know if it sounds like a silly answer, but I just don't want to see them compromise the integrity of what they've been doing. Is kind of I'm not locked in on like any certain event has to happen for me to be happy. I just don't want to leave the episode feeling like they had a really strong season and they were really sure in a lot of the things they wanted to say, and they had some like really interesting character development. And then I don't want the episode to like walk anything back for the sake of wrapping up quickly or returning to a status quo or anything like that. Like, I just really want them to stick the landing with what they're doing. And I feel
don't want a Marvel finish?
No, I don't.
You don't want a Disney Plus finish.
You don't want what we called the Falcon and the Winter Soldier Pepsi speech ending?
No.
You mean you don't want Magneto to come out in front of the cameras and be like, I was wrong. We should all just get along. I love politicians. They've never done anything wrong before in their lives.
Yeah, I don't want to see that and then like him and Xavier hug and then all of a sudden Gambit like pops out of a like Wizard of Oz curtain or something and he's like, I was alive the whole time, and they're like, wow, that's crazy.
I do still think we're getting death. I do. I have this like feeling that we're getting death.
It feels like somebody else is gonna.
I think we're gonna get war with Wolverine. Like that's the vibe that I'm getting, especially after Xavier had that like vision of the giant dead Gambit. I was like, okay, death. That's telegraphed.
And I also wanted to say, separate from the war thing, I think it's really funny that there's like I saw a tweet about this and I've just been thinking about it like ever since because I think it's really true. I do genuinely think it's really funny that they had 2 missions and one was to like go slice up robots and the other one was to fight the guy who controls metal, and they were like, Wolverine, of these 2 I think you should go on the guy who controls metal mission. I was like, I know. That's a fair point. I don't know why they did that.
Well, I think the only real reason is there's always the opportunity in the back, I'm sure, in Charles's mind that he needs somebody who will actually do the job. I'm the best at what I do. If I got to get it done, I'll find a way to get it done. And which, to a degree, he did. He actually hit him, but I mean, like a certain person said in the MCU, he should have gone for the head.
This is true. Which there is the one comic where he gets it through the neck. I can't remember which comics those are, but there's one where Magneto gets shanked straight through the throat.
Oof. I don't know. I don't think I'm familiar
with
that.
You got it. You might have to direct me to that one.
Jeez.
I was like, I gotta read that one. Oh boy. That's some great stuff right there. But I'll at least say for me, just in terms of what I want to see is the resolution, or at least the attempted resolution of the Xavier Magneto thing, and how that goes in conjunction with Bastion, and how that all is going to make sense and close, or does it close? Are we going to get a cliffhanger off these cliffhangers that we've had over the last couple of weeks going into season 2? And ultimately, the humans in this also, what are going to be their views, especially after all of this has occurred with Magneto? What is the aftermath?
There was some crazy like human talk in. Oh wow!
Oh my
goodness.
God!
Oh, that's crazy.
Earth 259.
Wow, that was intense. Yeah, I mean, I was gonna say there was some crazy human talk in this episode too, which I didn't notice it the first time, but the second time I watched it, I had subtitles on, and there was like at one point when Jubilee and Roberto are like running away from the crowd of people, they're saying some insane stuff. One lady just yells out, she's like, "You thought Genosha was bad," and I was like, "What? What are you like? What are you planning on doing? That's insane." That was like the most like batshit piece of dialogue. I was like, they just annihilated a country. What are you talking about? That's insane.
I was like, what are you going to do?
Yeah, it was just like some random lady. She's like, you thought Genosha was bad? And I was like, oh my god.
The old lady too. And
Yeah.
I was like,
It'll always be them too.
she had some flashbacks to things.
Goodness gracious. My jaw was on the floor. I was like, and it's happened so fast. That's insane. Why would you say that? What?
Jesus
It's
Christ.
so-
I forgot about that.
It's so hateful for no reason.
Oh man, so Maggie, in terms of what you might want to see and how this closes, do you perhaps want to see maybe one of your theories come to pass, or is there anything else that you're looking forward to for next week?
So I mean, I'm always looking for more kisses. I don't think I'm getting any more Rogue and Magneto kisses, but I do always live in hope because I have to say, like, I have liked that ship from the comics for a very, very long time since they were like first introduced. And I never, ever, ever thought that I would ever see it on screen or like have any substance to it. And this show delivered in a way that just like made me so happy. And it's funny too, because like I'm a lifelong like Remy and Rogue girl. Like Rami is my shiz. I've loved that my entire life. I have divested myself of that ship and I'm like full Rogue Nito now. So like I'm hoping for like a good moment there because I didn't think we got enough moments in this scene or this episode. And so I am hoping for at least one more scene there. There is a potential that they could do a flip narrative with the one comic panel where like Storm's the one holding Magneto when he dies. I can't remember which comic book it is, but it's a really memorable panel and they could have it be Rogue. I would be very into that. I am very tired of my favorite characters dying, but that is okay. But yeah, I think my biggest wish right now is for Remy as Death. I think that was a really interesting, fun arc in the comics. I think they're setting it up for that. I also think that will make the discourse more bearable between now and season 2 because it has been a chore to have to mute Gambit on my timeline because I was just tired of the discourse. So I think bringing him back would make me very happy. Not personally, but just as people who are sad.
Right.
And I was sad too. Like, don't get me wrong. I was very, very sad about Gambit's death. I think his death was also really cool. There's a part of me that does not want him to come back in any capacity because I think
same because I think it's meaningful. I
so
totally
meaningful.
Understand where you're coming from there.
Yeah.
I think they're from and it's not just stakes for stakes discourse, but it's just the idea of when you're writing a story, and especially something specifically as terrible and horrific happens in Genosha like it does, a casualty of somebody that we love as fans, I think is important because it's like, oh, this is really a problem. And this is where Magneto's ideology comes into play. And it's like, hey, man, this thing that Charles is talking about is crazy. What were we doing here? So
exactly.
I totally understand.
Yeah, so like personally, I don't want him to come back. I do love the idea of Remy as Death, but I think my desire to see that is more, like I was saying, like to quiet the discourse that has gotten a bit annoying. And I do kind of want to see Onslaught, and I also kind of
That's
want
kind
to
of what
know.
I want to see too. Yeah,
I kind of want to know if we're getting Joseph in season 2 because I think we're setting some things up that we could get Joseph in season 2. So I don't know. I have lots of hopes and dreams there. Most of them are related to Magneto.
So Maggie, if I may, because you mentioned Joseph, if you could possibly explain to some of the uninitiated audience who that person might be.
So Joseph is essentially like a clone of Magneto who is different than Magneto because obviously it's a clone. In the comics, he gets really close to Rogue. That's why a lot of people originally thought that with the stuff happening with Rogue and Magneto in this season that they thought that maybe he was actually Joseph. He's obviously Eric. But yeah, he's a clone that's created and it's a really convoluted story arc, but I think that with the way that they are doing the Cliff Notes versions of so many of these comic book runs, I think they can make Joseph work really interestingly. And I have had in like the back of my head the remembrance of the San Diego Comic-Con panel where they showed the preliminary art for the show, and they had 2 different looking versions of Magneto. One where he was the silver-haired fox that we love and know, and then one where he was older looking with a beard. And that was where I started thinking that we were going to get Joseph, because the logical way for them to have somebody who looks older, even though in the comics Joseph is younger, but they could have it tweaked to make him look that much different. So like I've had that stored in the back of my head for like 2 years, wondering if we were getting the Joseph arc.
And if there's
that's a nice nugget.
If there's one thing Marvel loves, it's really convoluted stories about clones.
They love them.
They really do love those.
For sure. And this is gonna be interesting, man. This season has been absolutely amazing and excellent beyond honestly my wildest imagination. I could not have thought that this could be any greater than it has been to this point. So I'm excited to see where the finale goes. Before we go, there's a couple of things that happened actually big in the MCU today. And I figure while we have this crew here, we should talk about it a little bit. So the Fantastic Four movie that is shooting this summer we obviously know the four. We've gotten some other key characters into play. Two things happened. First, we got John Malkovich cast in some role that we don't know as of yet. And we have our Galactus cast. Ralph Ineson, if I'm not mistaken. And I want to get the thoughts of the room. Let's start with Malkovich, because this was kind of a surprise to folks seeing that. Jake, I'll start with you. What are you thinking as far as that's concerned?
I mean, he's a great actor. I don't have a ton of thoughts until I know who he's playing. But yeah, I mean, he famously was supposed to be Vulture in the unmade Raimi's Spider-Man 4. So I'm excited to see him finally come through. I mean, he's a guy who he can bring some ham to a big budget movie if he's so inclined, and I hope he does. I hope he doesn't sleepwalk through it, because he can do both. He can give you Cyrus the Virus, but he can also kind of sleep through a big movie.
and Maggie, what are your thoughts when you see this news?
I am really excited about the Galactus casting. I don't think that he was ever even in the realm of somebody who I would consider for that role, especially since Galactus has been a heavily fan cast role over the last few months. And so like from a personal level, I was excited to see somebody that wasn't in everybody's fan casting. That completely took me by surprise. He's incredible in The Witch. He's incredible in so many of the projects that he's been in. So I think that he will bring a really interesting acting perspective to Marvel that maybe we haven't necessarily gotten his style of acting. I don't know how to explain that. Like he's kind of outside of what I would typically see in Marvel. Like not cookie cutter appearances, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Like, he has a very specific look to him. And so I'm excited about that. I'm also just excited about Fantastic Four in general. Everything about the castings and like the choices that they're making and the setting it in the 60s and like all of these various things have gotten me very excited for what they could do.
I am a Matt Shakman guy in terms of everything. After what I saw in WandaVision, it seems like he has a very specific vision for what he wants to do with this. Yes, and it is very exciting because I get this feeling that he's about to cook something special, and this cast is a really, really interesting and amazing one to me. So I'm excited to see what they do. Hunter, how about you?
I love seeing a good character actor get work. Ralph Ineson is fantastic in everything, and I think that anyone who knows what his voice sounds like should be thrilled that he's playing this role. I could listen to him talk forever. It's the perfect Galactus voice, and yeah, I never in a million years thought they would go that direction for that character, but I'm so pumped about it. And then Malkovich could be anybody. I would like to think that he's gonna, go all in with whatever. I feel like if he can commit to Space Force, he can commit to this. And I don't know, when they first cast him, because it was before Innocent, I was like, I don't know, this could be a really out of the box Galactus with just like this crazy like Malkovich voice or whatever. Yeah. But now we know it's not that, and I've seen so many things thrown around. I mean, the Fantastic Four have so many wacky villains and side characters that he could really bring. Like, I know
Mole Man was mentioned. Yeah, as somebody.
Mole Man is mentioned. I know Paul Walter Hauser was like, a lot of people assumed that might be the role that he was playing. I've seen people throw out Wizard. I've seen people throw out Sue and Johnny's dad, which also seems really possible, honestly. But I've seen all sorts of things. At this point, I have no idea. I think it'd be really funny if they got someone as high profile and talented as Malkovich, and then they were like, and he's Herbie. That would be great. I wouldn't even be that upset, because then every time Herbie talked, it'd just be John Malkovich voice, and I think that would be hilarious. But yeah, I don't know, but it's just the casting for this movie in general is kind of insane. And I can't believe it's coming together the way that it is, and I'm super pumped to see whatever happens.
It's nice to get to a point in the MCU, and especially after Bob Iger's comments earlier in the week regarding the slate and how they're going to do things going forward, is now you're at a point where you feel like you're starting to miss it. You're starting to, and then with Deadpool and Wolverine coming out later in the year, in the next couple months, you get a little bit of that back, and then we'll see what the slate is going forward. So in the meantime, we will enjoy X-Men 97, and we'll see what's to come later in the MCU. It should be very exciting. I want to thank our guest this evening for joining us. First, Maggie, our first timer. Appreciate you for hopping on and giving us your perspective on everything. It was awesome to have you. Where can we follow you? Where can we find your work?
So you can find me on Twitter at Maggie of the Town. I'm also over on Instagram as the Maggie Lovitt, and I am over at Collider, where I am the lead news editor. I do a lot of fun stuff over there, and I actually have a couple of X-Men 97 interviews in the works. Nothing's confirmed yet, but fingers crossed those pan out next week. I'm very excited for that. So yeah, I have lots of exciting stuff in the works in the next couple of weeks and months over there.
Awesome stuff. And Hunter, before I let you say where we can find you and stuff along those lines, I was thinking about one of my favorite episodes of this podcast that I've ever done was the dropped plot lines in the MCU that we did last year, and I'm getting close to having a little bit of an itch to revisit that for a part 2. So I just want to throw that out there to you beforehand, and we can lock back in for something.
Oh yeah.
And with that, where can we find you? Where can we follow you, sir?
I am H Radesi 14 on basically everything. That's H and then my last name Radesi. I did famously misspell that on this podcast once. And then the number 14 on just about everything. I'm writing things here and there, some stuff for streamers, some stuff for a website called Cinelinks. And then also currently I had been teasing it for a while, and I kind of just poked it and opened it up to the world the other day. I spent the last year of my life working on this documentary that's really personal to me, and I'm very passionate about. So if you follow me, you're going to start getting more and more updates on that. I just spent my whole day kind of looking at footage and starting to come up with an outline for it. It's about Bills Mafia, Bills fans who go to this bar in Brooklyn called Fulton Ale House, and all the wonderful people there, and what it's like loving something from home when you don't live at home anymore. So that is that. So please follow me and pay attention, because I'm working really hard on it, and it's a super big commitment, and I want everyone to see it. So
yes, promote that bad boy. Looking forward to seeing that. And thank you once again for joining us. And Jake, where can we follow you, sir?
You can find me on Twitter at the Jake Christie. Listen to my other podcast, Love It for a Psych, where me and Andre Barrera talk about the USA Network original series Psych.
There you go. And of course, you can follow me on Twitter at AnthonyCanton_3. Follow the show at MC University Pod on all platforms. Subscribe to the YouTube channel, and of course the Patreon, as I mentioned. There was an earlier podcast that did release today or yesterday, if you're listening to this or watching this now. Friend of the show, Rod, and we discussed the Drake Kendrick beef. It was a fun conversation. We really got into it and kind of spanned who won, who lost, and who's looking crazy from every side, and where do we go from here. It was a fun conversation. I have not been this stoked as a hip hop fan in a long time, so it was nice to have that conversation with Rod. Rod is just a tremendous guy to talk to about these things or anything in general. So go check that out if you're so inclined. And appreciate everybody for supporting and listening to the show. And with that, for Maggie and Hunter and Jake, I'm Anthony Canton III. This has been Marvel Cinematic University, and we will talk to you next time.